Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Stacks. I'm Christy Pearson with Friends of the Hennepin County Library. Thank you so much for joining us for an especially sweet season finale. Now, but first, on behalf of the library and friends, we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that in Hennepin County, we live and work on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. Today, the effects of colonization and oppression are felt locally by our Indigenous communities. By offering this acknowledgement, we commit to recognizing Indigenous nations and to the ongoing work of reconciliation. Thank you. Well, I'd next like to recognize our wonderful sponsors who help make this free series possible. Many thanks to the Minnesota Star Tribune, Ice House, and LSE Architects. So let's give them a hand. And I love seeing this full house because tonight our longtime Star Tribune contributors Lee Svidakdeen and Rick Nelson are joining us to celebrate the launch of the Ultimate Minnesota Cookie Book. And now when it comes to cookbooks, there aren't many collections that can beat our very own Hennepin County Libraries with its stellar range of more than 13,000 cookbooks. I know, it's pretty impressive, isn't it? For budding bakers to experienced chefs and for everyone in between. In fact, our library's cooking section is one of the largest in the country. Now this year, thanks to the support of library friends like you, we have pledged $2.4 million to our library in support of funding of programs, services, and resources like our collection of cookbooks and bestsellers. So if you happen to want to help us reach that goal for the library that you love, now is the perfect time. Imagine that. With Give to the Max Day approaching quickly, we are looking for 1,000 donors to help us unlock a $30,000 matching gift. So your donation tonight through November 31st in any amount will help us reach that goal. So thank you so much for your consideration. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Nicole Vidston, who is the Star Tribune's taste editor. Please join me in welcoming Nicole to Talk of the Stacks.
Hello, and thank you everybody for that warm greeting. It's a real pleasure to be here at Talk of the Stacks, a program that we at the Minnesota Star Tribune are very proud to support. As institutions that provide the public with the resources and knowledge they need to be engaged and thoughtful citizens, we are honored to stand by the library in these mutual pursuits. Tonight, however, we're thrilled to share something a little bit more fun and festive, cookies. The Holiday Cookie Contest has been an annual tradition for both the Star Tribune and Minnesota bakers for more than 2 decades. What started out as an idea to engage with the readers of the Star Tribune's taste section has become a beloved part of the holiday season. And as taste editor, I'm very proud to continue that tradition. This year's winning cookies will be announced on December 5th, so mark your calendars, earning a place on the cookie tray alongside the 100 winning recipes found in the Ultimate Minnesota Cookie Book. I smile when I see that book on the bookstore, in bookstores and on the library shelves, remembering years of cookie memories with my friends and longtime colleagues. And speaking of, now I'd like to introduce tonight's guest of honors. Tonight's moderator, Chris Hewitt, has written about movies, theater, and books for publications that vary from a small-town newspaper to a city magazine to national sites. He's currently the interim books editor and my colleague at the Star Tribune, and he's also an excellent baker and has served as cookie contest judges, but he probably wouldn't tell you that. Tonight's special guest authors are Lee Svidakdeen and Rick Nelson. Lee was the longtime food editor at the Star Tribune, where she guided the taste section to multiple James Beard Awards, an Emmy, and national recognition as Best Food Section. She is also the author of Come One, Come All, Easy Entertaining with Seasonal Menus. Rick was the Star Tribune's restaurant critic and food writer for 24 years. He is a James Beard Award winner, and his writing has been included in 4 editions of the annual Best Food Writing Anthology, which highlights the finest in American food journalism. Here to celebrate the release of their brand new cookbook, the Ultimate Minnesota Cookie Book, Please join me in welcoming special guest authors Lee Dean and Rick Nelson and moderator Chris Hewitt to talk of the stacks.
I kind of want us to have a rule that every time we say the word cookies, we have to say it like Nicole just did. Cookies! You sounded kind of like a cookie fairy, Nicole. I loved it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to just dive right in because we have a lot of cookie talk to get through here. We might as well start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. When did the two of you start baking?
As a kid at my grandmother's little red metal kitchen table, she would have us over the holidays to make cutout cookies. The traditional hours spent decorating them and spreading sprinkles everywhere. So that was really the start.
Nice. And for me also, my grandmother Hedvig, who was the daughter of Swedish immigrants, and she grew up on a farm, and she could basically make anything out of nothing. And she would come over to our house when I was a kid, and she would spend 2 or 3 days just baking and filling our freezer. And it was like the greatest gift that a grandmother could, give you. Yeah.
That is.
I mean, 60 years later, people in my family still talk about her baking, and it's like, what a legacy, right?
Holy moly, yeah. Which I feel like is probably going to happen with both of you too. I know Rick for sure, and I think probably Lee often, and this is a concept that is entirely foreign to me who loves to eat baked goods and cookies as well, but often you have morning baking and you're not even making those cookies for you to eat. Like, is there a reason that morning is a good time to bake, I should say?
I'll let you go. Yeah.
Well, for me, so I post on some kind of social media outlet. I've been baking, and I call it morning baking, and I just post a picture of whatever it is. For me, I don't know. I just like to get up in the morning and put some butter on the counter and bring it to room temperature and make something. I don't know.
Like you do.
Like one does, yeah. It's just a habit that I have, and I really, like, I, of course, would basically eat everything that I bake, but I can't. So I'd like to give things away, and it makes people like you when you give things to, yeah.
I've been the recipient.
Definitely. I would say, too, morning is when I have the most energy, I would say, and it's easier to get going on a project. And yeah, my neighbors are basically the recipients of whatever I'm doing that day. So
That's a little benefit the realtor should throw into the home tours in your neighborhood, huh? Since you guys presided over the cookie contest for so many years, we obviously want to talk about that a little bit. And maybe a good place to start is, were there ever in all of those years, and as they're documented in the beautiful book, surprises? Were you ever taken aback?
I was surprised
Yeah.
a lot, actually. I mean, the whole premise of the contest was to bring new cookies to Star Tribune readers, right? And I was always kind of blown away by the kind of creativity and enthusiasm and generosity of people who thought of ideas all year long so they could enter a recipe in our contest. I just thought that was the greatest thing ever. And so I was constantly surprised by really, really imaginative and unusual ideas for ingredients and for cookies, and it always kind of blew me away, frankly.
We're going to bookmark that ingredient comment. How about you, Lee?
And I would say one of the things that surprised me also was just the sense that we never intended that this was going to be a 20-year plus event. This was a one-timer that at the end of it, it seemed so popular and we had such a great response. We said, let's try it another time, one more year and see what happens. Second year came, we had even more entries. And after that, it was like, we'll just keep it going until we've run out of recipes. And the surprise is we've never run out of recipes. And the other part of that surprise, I think, was that, again, this was not intended, but we seem to have built a community of bakers, whether or not they know each other. We had so many stories of people who got together with friends and family when the 5 recipes would come out on the day of announcement, and they would spend the weekend making those 5 cookies, and many of them also would spend the year, as Rick indicated, working on new recipes for the coming year. So it had this kind of snowball effect of involving all these bakers around the Twin Cities and beyond. And it just struck me that that was such a wonderful thing for a newspaper to offer. And we were certainly thrilled at the result of that, so.
Yeah, building a community where there wasn't one.
Yeah.
Or at least that didn't know of it.
Yeah.
You were talking about ingredients a little bit, Rick. Can the two of you talk about, I remember sort of secondhand being aware of kind of waves of this is the year of turmeric or
Right.
were there other ingredients that were hot in various years?
I will say we did have one turmeric cookie that was a winner, so.
I think I tried that one.
It's a very bright yellow one.
But yeah, we would go through, it was interesting to see that readers would pick up on culinary trends happening, in the zeitgeist and incorporate them into cookies. Like the year that everybody was doing brown butter for the first time, or the year everybody was doing espresso powder for the first time and incorporating that with chocolate. I think it's a story we've told before, but like the year that kale came out, and and everybody was doing, like, kale had its own movie, and like it was such a big ingredient. And we had like, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 kale recipes, and so we thought, well, let's try maybe one of them and just see how it goes. And guess what? It sucked. It was really bad. It was like,
Sorry if you're here.
Sorry if you're here. Thanks for the try. Leafy greens and cookies, like it just doesn't mix.
It was a vivid green,
Yeah.
as you can imagine. So yeah.
I remember the pine needle cookie.
Oh, the pine needle, I forgot about that one. That was a good one, yeah. Where someone asked, they wanted to incorporate the flavor of, evergreen into a cookie. And of course, the woman who was doing the baking for us was like, well, we can't just go and cut it off the tree. What if there was an insecticide that had been sprayed on it? So she went like into a state forest somewhere about 50 miles away and, cut down this pristine, not cut down, but like took a sample from it. It was like, and guess what? Awful. It's like, yeah.
I remember you kind of couldn't get it out of your teeth.
Yeah.
And you really wanted to. And of course, we can't talk about ingredients without mentioning the great almond flour run of 2014 or whatever year that was.
Yeah.
Right?
So one of the many ways that we measured how the popularity of the contest was when we had frantic calls from readers and or supermarket managers saying that they no longer could get the ingredients. And in this case, almond flour was the biggie.
It was a really great cookie with a really great story, actually. And if we could talk a little bit about stories later, we can come back to that. But it was almond flour. It required, I don't know, like 2 cups of almond flour for this cookie. It's called the Italian almond cookie in the book, and it's fantastic. And the paper came out on Thursday, and I think I'd gone through all my almond flour because, I'd baked the cookie 3 or 4 times just to see if it worked. And I was going to a party that weekend, and I thought, well, everybody's going to expect that cookie. So I went to the co-op, and they didn't have any almond flour. And okay, that's interesting. And I went to Lund's. They didn't have any. I went to supermarkets I've never visited. I went to like 7 or 8, no almond flour. There's a total run on almond flour in the Twin Cities. And that's when we knew that people were really into this contest. Yeah.
I should know too now, you can get almond flour at Costco in giant bags, but you could not at that point. So I think we created that trend.
Well, I think that might have been the week, I happen to be in the same book club as Rick, and I think that might have been the week book club met, because I sort of remember somebody greeting you at the door with, I was going to make macaron this week, Rick, but thanks, there's no almond flour in the Twin Cities, so I can't do it. One thing I wonder always about ingredients, I'm a Land O'Lakes guy, but does European butters, do you guys use special super butters that the rest of us don't know about? Do they make a difference? Are they good for baking?
I would say that I also stick with Land O'Lakes, and
Okay.
I know that others swear by the fancier butters, and Rick can address this too, but I come from a family of dairy farmers, so I stick with the Land O'Lakes. Yeah.
And I think Land O'Lakes is a great butter too. I remember, 15 years ago, Savory magazine said, this is the butter that you should buy. America, this is the butter you should buy for baking. And I was like, All right, yay. And I'm mostly by it, but sometimes like if I have a cookie that has a very butter-forward flavor in it, I want to use a richer butter, so I'll buy like a locally made butter called Hope, which is has a slightly richer butter fat and has a yellower, depending on the season, it's yellower looking because it has more, there's more grass in it, and so I'll do that sometimes too. Like the European butters, they're too rich, I think, for kind of the recipes that Americans make, and so you have to compensate a little bit. The cookies will spread more, so you either have to add a little more flour to them, or you have to chill the dough, those kinds of tricks.
Just a little tip, Rick, if you want the cookie to be yellower, I hear turmeric's a good addition.
I read that, yeah.
Have you ever, and I guess this is talking about the contest, but also probably just the section, have you ever had a disagreement about a cookie? Have you ever, one of you been a big fan of and one of you been of?
I don't remember that if we disagreed about anything, it wasn't, strongly. It was like, I kind of like this one, but if you really like that one,
And
that's
we
fine.
have different
Yeah.
tastes about
Yeah.
cookies too. Lee has a very solid idea of what a cookie should be versus what I have, so, yeah.
So I'm definitely an outlier when it comes to cookies. I don't like really sweet things anywhere, and particularly in cookies. And so, which doesn't mean I can't judge I can't judge a cookie that's super sweet, but my preference is, people joke about this, but it's not like it's savory, but it's pretty darn close to that for a cookie. So sometimes we debate about, is this too sweet, is this not too sweet, and that would probably be more the extent of it than anything, so.
So there was no like wrestling throwdown
No.
or?
No,
No,
not really.
we're
But like,
sca-
we would get 200-300 recipes in that year, and we would sort through them, and we would have a yes, a maybe, and a no pile. And I could always see, oh, if this has blue cheese in it, Lee's going to want to test it, like, right? Yeah.
What if you, and I know this is like almost Sophie's choice of cookie questions, but if you could only eat one cookie for the rest of your life, what would it be? And if you could only make one cookie for the rest of your life, what would it be? And are they the same or different?
I would say the one that I would eat would be the peanut blossom cookie. It was my absolute favorite cookie of my entire life. With the Hershey's Kiss, and it's got the peanut butter.
He
I love those-
rhapsodizes about it in the book.
I love those cookies. Do I want to make those for the rest of my life? Because the act of peeling all that foil off the thing, it makes me crazy. And I said, why don't they just put it, without the wrap? I don't get it. But and people say use the Brock Star. No, don't use the Brock Stars. They're terrible. You have to. They're awful flavor. But so I would say one to make. I'm kind of lazy, so it would be a drop cookie. It would be your mother's molasses crinkles is the cookie that I would want to make for the rest of my life.
That's a good cookie. And it's in the book. How about you, Lee?
I would say, if I'm talking about my very favorite cookies, it would be family related, and it would be sandbachels, which only appear occasionally during the year. Those are also in the book. They're not very sweet. And if I was going to be making them, and I have been lately, that would be a shortbread that it's a cranberry, cornmeal, rosemary shortbread that really is not that sweet, but it's tart, which is even better. And so it's really fabulous. You don't even need a electric mixer. You just whip it up in a bowl, and it's great, really great.
And
And
the
that
good
one
thing,
kinda works as a cracker.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but that cookie, that won the contest whatever year it was, and it was kind of like a marker for us because it barely has any sugar in it, and it has these rosemary hints in it, and it was like there was a ship was moving, and it was like, get away from sweet a little bit and go towards, something maybe not quite savory, but not so toothachingly sweet. Maybe the year before it had been a milestone year for the contest, and so we invited 3 Twin Cities pastry chefs to come into the paper. We baked the 10 winning cookies, and we said, what do you think of these? And so they tasted one off. We had a photographer and a videographer doing all that, and every single one of them were like, these are way too sweet.
Oh.
I was vindicated.
So, you touched on this a little bit, Lee. Savory cookies? Is that, where do we stand on savory cookies?
Well, there were some discussions, perhaps a little more emphatic than than usual on, is a savory cookie a cracker?
Yeah.
And are you going to throw off your guest if you've got these savory cookies? And they pulled me back from the edge. And so the cookies that we have 2 cookies with blue cheese, if I remember, at least 2 cookies, which are still sweet. And they have, I have to stop and think here, they have cherries, or they have tart stuff with it. So it doesn't actually, it seems sweet, even though it's not really sweet. So to your question, nah, you can't get too savory, but you can get right up to the line.
Lee's favorite line was always, "This would be wonderful on a cheese plate."
I know, cookies should be there.
Well, I heard a chorus of no's when when you said is a savory cookie just a cracker? I should say I heard a chorus of yeses. I feel like the audience feels like a savory cookie is a cracker. So we'll go with that. I like to bake, but I cannot stand chopping chocolate. It's so messy. My hands are always sweaty and covered with chocolate. And are there, you two baking lovers, are there baking tasks that you would like to delegate to someone if you had the opportunity to do so?
Anything that involves a piping bag, I just immediately freeze up. It's like it's the rolling out pie dough equivalent for cookies for me. I'm terrible at rolling out pie dough too, but anything in it, I lose my mind. Yeah.
And I would say probably for me, it's chopping up anything that's really sticky, so it sticks to the knife and it sticks on you and kind of makes a mess. Chocolate doesn't strike me as much of a problem, though, so maybe you just need to hold the knife better.
Maybe that's the problem. I mean, I heard the thing about serrated knife is the way to go, so I'm doing that. Maybe I need gloves. I don't know. Most of us who bake occasionally have a disaster. Do the two of you have disasters, even though you're experts?
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
And
yeah.
let's hear some.
Not so much with cookies, but I can recall making a cake once. It was a caramel cake, and it was so bad that as it was like a 3-layer cake, and when I, very carefully put all the layers on, and I turned away for a second, and the entire thing fell over of its own accord, and what am I doing wrong here? And then I tasted it, and it was the worst cake I've ever made. It was like, yeah. So, yeah.
So you couldn't even make it into a
at
trifle?
cookies. Pardon?
You couldn't even make it into a trifle?
No, it was a disaster. Yeah.
And for me, it was when I was working on one of the chapters in the book, it was the personal chapter with family recipes. And one of the things I was trying was a cookie I remembered that my mother had made. It was an applesauce cinnamon cookie. And it's an old Betty Crocker cookie. And I was making multiple cookies at one time, and I had all the ingredients laid out. And mixed all the ingredients, thought to myself, this is kind of dry dough. I don't remember it ever being that dry. But I had more cookies to go. It was for pictures, so I had a good reason to be super busy. And put it in the oven, and then I looked over the counter at the ingredients that were left, and I realized I left off the applesauce. And I thought, oh, should I dump this? And then I thought, well, no, I'm going to try it. It's already in the oven. And so I tried it, and I thought, wow, it's not bad. It's not applesauce, but it's super cinnamony. And then I brought them to Rick and the photographer, because we're taking pictures that afternoon, and said, what do you think? And they thought, it's fabulous. And so I'd like to use that as an example that sometimes your really big mistakes can be, inspiration for something else. I actually went back I went back home after that because the cookies were kind of hard as rocks, sort of like biscotti, only maybe twice as tough. And I thought the last thing you want to do is have somebody break a tooth when they're eating your cookie. So I reformulated the recipe, and it's in the book, and it is one of the best cookies in the entire book.
Wow.
just saying that.
Well, and that's didn't Mrs. Tollhouse accidentally dump chocolate into a
Well, that's what they
cookie
say,
recipe?
yes.
So it's like an origin story along those lines. I love it. Do either of you watch any of the baking shows that are on TV pretty much all the time? I think I know the
don't.
answer, but no.
I don't, I'm sorry.
No,
No,
Too much of a busman's holiday situation?
a little bit,
Kinda,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That makes sense. Is there something that distinguishes a good cookie baker specifically from, like, I don't know, a bread baker or a cake baker? Are there certain skills that you particularly need to have, or things that are particularly important about making cookies?
Well, I feel like cookies are really great because they're essentially the gateway to baking. Like, it's the first thing that everybody basically bakes, right, is cookies. Or if you've never baked before, and you didn't bake with your grandmother, as I did, and you have your first apartment, and cookies are basically the first thing. They don't need a lot of equipment. They're not complicated. And so I think that I've always loved that about baking cookies. It's like anybody can do it, right? So to me, that, I don't know.
and just to tap into that, really, there is no cookie that goes wrong. You can always find somebody who will eat the cookies. And at the end of the day, what other food is like that? So it is a great thing to experiment in, and it is shocking at times. What people will eat, and we would bring stale cookies that had been photographed and had been manhandled and looked terrible by the time we brought them into the office, and they were gone in 5 minutes, you know?
Yeah, if it's a little dry, it's a dunking cookie or whatever, right? Talking about your grandma, Rick, you talk in the book, both of you, a lot about nostalgia and baking and cooking. What's the connection, do you think, between cookies and nostalgia? And do you have any favorite stories of the hundreds over the years from bakers who submitted to the contest?
Well, I think the contest is so successful in part because it does take place around the holidays, which are just, dipped in nostalgia anyway. That whole season is all about nostalgia, really. And so then when you attach something like cookies to it, it becomes part of that nostalgic story as well. And so I think that's one of the reasons why cookies are kind of universal for all of us. It's because, particularly here in Minnesota, where it's cold and people want to turn their ovens on in the winter and warm up their kitchens, and then you have this whole kind of cultural DNA, about the Scandinavians and the Germans and the Poles and the Italians who came here and who really had a cookie baking tradition. And so I think that all of that nostalgia kind of like whirls around together in the cookie world.
And just to tap into that sort of warm kitchen, cold outdoors, there's just something so incredibly homey, and you're drawn close in a kitchen. It's warm in the kitchen. The oven's going on. It smells fabulous. It just taps into all those memory links that you have, and again, you just can't go wrong making cookies. And I just want to add one other thing about cookies. Well, actually, probably more than one, but one of the fabulous things about cookies is that can anyone be grumpy eating a cookie? Because I don't think you can be, and just speaking from my own experience here, there would be many times at the Star Tribune when I'd be working on a deadline, couldn't leave for lunch. Rick could go to lunch because it was work, supposedly. And he would come back, and there would be this like little bag, and it would be a cookie. It'd be a chocolate cookie, and it was like, it was just the greatest thing greatest treat. And it was like, the afternoon went by in a flash after that. Mm-hmm. And so I also think that it is this tremendous gift that you can give people, and thank you over and over again. Thank you many times. But yeah.
It's almost like Steve Martin said about the banjo, that you can't be unhappy when you're playing a banjo.
Right.
Banjos and cookies are a magic combo.
Wow, we could start something here.
Let's do it. It's the next book. What about stories from the book, the baker stories from the book? Did you guys have favorites, and did they ever influence the inclusion or exclusion of a cookie from the contest?
Oh, for sure. I mean, for me, a fundamental part of the contest were the stories behind the cookies. We're journalists, and so we wanted to tell stories and not just publish recipes. And so that became a real big part of the contest, I felt. And one of my favorite parts of the contest. I loved hearing some of the stories. One of my absolute favorites was a young guy had a year abroad in Italy. He was studying at the University of Bologna, and he started dating an Italian woman in Bologna. And on the weekends, they would get on a train and go and visit her family, I don't know, 100 miles away or something like that. And the grandmothers always made these, one of the grandmothers made these almond cookies. And he had it for like a whole year, and he just loved these cookies. And so on his last visit there, he very sheepishly said, Nana, would you be willing to share this? I'm going back to the United States. Would you be willing to share this recipe? And she said, no. Like, you little upstart America, you're not getting this family tradition, right? And so he came back to the U.S., and he was a waiter at Lucia's restaurant, and he spent about a year trying to reformulate this cookie recipe, and it was so good that he started making it for everybody, and somebody said, you need to enter this in the Star Tribune cookie contest, and he won.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I love that story.
That is a good story.
Yeah.
I would just note too that we probably read the stories first before looking at the recipes, because that was such an integral part of the way it was going to be presented in the newspaper. But there were a few times where the story was just such a charmer, and it like pulled every heartstring there was, and we thought, this cookie doesn't sound very good, but the story's so great, so let's at least try it, because we might be mistaken. And it would be, no. It was a bad cookie, and we just, at the end of the day, they had to be good cookies that were going to be in the winning circle.
I don't mean to harp on the baking shows that you two don't watch, and that I watch all of, but one you for sure don't want to watch that you just reminded me of that's sort of new is this Milk Street homemade thing where people, it's sort of like what you were saying with the grandma. People have a recipe that's in their family. They write into Milk Street to have them try to formulate a recipe because they don't have an actual recipe. And the people are like, I just can't get it right. And then the camera shows them in their kitchen at home, and they've been told to put in half a teaspoon of baking soda, and they like scoop it out,
Yeah.
heaping half teaspoon of baking soda, throw it in. So I guess maybe the person who's not good at making cookies is the person who can't measure. I mean, measuring is important
Yeah.
in cookies,
Measuring is
right?
very important,
We can all
yes.
agree on that. What are some other qualities that are important in a good baker?
I think, well, patience is a good one. And I think a willingness to learn is a really good one. But I remember interviewing the cookbook author, Sarah Kiefer, who lives here in Minneapolis, and has a couple of really excellent cookie books.
Love her.
She's phenomenal. And she said, really the quality that a baker really needs to have is the willingness to practice. Like, practice really does make perfect. And when you practice things over and over, you become more comfortable in a methodology, or become more comfortable dealing with an ingredient. And you become more attuned to, well, what happens if I bake these 30 seconds longer, or 30 seconds less? When you do things over and over. And a really good example of that, to come back to Chris's mother's cookie, Mrs. Hewitt's molasses crinkle, Chris gave me that recipe, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, maybe?
At least, yeah.
A really long time ago. And I started tinkering with it over the years. And then during the pandemic, I basically baked that cookie about 1,000 times. It was like the cookie that kept me going. And I would tinker with it more and more, and I would change the spice levels. I would refrigerate the dough overnight. I would use different butter, shortening. And I came up with what to me is the ideal version of that cookie. And I did it all because I practiced.
And my mom has tasted Rick's version and also likes his version. So, just in case anyone's wondering. It's not that different, but it's a little different. By the way, hi, Mom. I think she's watching on Zoom. What about tools? Are there, I think I read something actually that you were talking about an important tool. Are there, if people are setting up their house for cooking and specifically for cooking cookies, what do they need? Anything in particular?
Outside of the sort of obvious, couple sets of measuring cups, sometimes if you've got a lot going on at one time, and I'm trying to think here.
The revelation you had in the Star Tribune was ice cream scoops, I think.
Oh, that's, okay, you're just leading me to that question.
Sorry,
Okay,
sorry.
So this goes under the question of, have you learned anything new lately, Lee?
Let me
And-
try again. Lee, have you learned anything new lately?
Well, one of the best things I think about baking and talking with others about baking is that you learn new things that make life easier or better as a baker. And the other thing that I'll acknowledge is that I, like many of you out there, may have learned to do something in a certain way because your mother showed you or grandmother showed you, and you did it that way for no other reason than it had been done that way for 100 years, so why would you ever change it? And in this case, as we're prepping these cookies for photography for the book, Rick is always bringing all these little scoopers. They're
Yeah,
called scoopers, right?
yeah, scoops,
Like ice
yeah.
cream scoopers, only small for cookies, tablespoon size. And was telling me that this, like, he didn't actually tell me, I just watched him like whip through making all these cookies. And when I did it with my grandmother, it was like you took a little scoop and you rolled it in your hand and you put it down, and you know, it probably took a minute and you had a lot of cookies to make like that. And so I went home. First I went to Target and bought a scooper, and then went home and tried this little magic utensil, and it's a life changer. Oh my gosh! If you have to make 100 cookies, that's the way to do it. So yeah.
I'm a recent convert too. I'm in. What about you, Rick? Are there any other tools you think are important?
You know, you do not need to have a stand mixer to make cookies. I mean,
What?
but
Yeah.
it really helps if you do. But it's not necessary. But it's like that's a wonderful tool to have. For me, it's half sheet tray sheet pans for baking. I go to the Nordic Ware outlet or the store, and they have like a little scratch and dent section, and that's where I buy them because they're like $5 or $6. Why do you need a perfect sheet pan that has a little tiny dent? Who cares? It has a dent in it. Big deal. And you know, so I probably have 15 of them. I just have a big long stack of them. So when you're baking and you're doing a ton of baking, you want to, well, first your baking sheet should be cold. You don't want to start the baking before it gets in the oven. So it's nice to have a lot of them. So like I lay out like 5 or 6, and I buy parchment paper that's been pre-cut because I'm super lazy, and I just put that down, and it makes baking really easy. And the sheet pans are terrific. They're very even. They work really well in a convection oven. Yeah, you have to have those, I think. Yeah.
Parchment paper, I'm also a recent convert to that. That's another good one. I used to feel it was wasteful, but,
Yeah.
I mean, it is wasteful, but
Well, just to back that up just a little bit, Rick and I both learned what should have been kind of obvious, which
Yeah.
is that you can actually reuse parchment, like
Yeah,
forever.
Yeah, until it falls apart, right, yeah.
So
forever?
pretty much, yeah. So you just need to like borrow a sheet from a neighbor and you're good. You're good to go for the year. Give them some cookies and you're fine.
Oh, all right. I think that could work out for me. This might be too philosophical of a question, so feel free to reject it. Can you tell anything about a person based on the cookies they make?
I think it's more you can tell someone when they don't make cookies. Like, you know, you're the person who always hauls cookies to an event, and then someone shows up at your house, and they never have cookies. It's like, what's with that? Like, it's not that hard, you know? Bake some cookies.
Get a scoop.
Get a scoop.
Did you have any thoughts on that philosophical question, or are we rejecting
I think we
that
can
one?
move on, yeah.
Okay. Over the years of doing the cookie contest, was there ever a cookie that got away, like one that in retrospect you thought, oh gosh, we should have included that in the top 5, but it was too hard to make, or for whatever reason didn't make the final cut?
Yes, there were cookies that were too hard to make. And,
Yeah.
and an example was the last year that I did the contest in 2022. So just to back up a little bit, we would select out of the 200 or 300 recipes that came in, we would select like 20, 25, 30 that we were going to actually bake, and we would bring all those cookies into a conference room, and we would have a taste off to see, and that's how we would select the winner based on taste and looks and all that kind of stuff. We did that for a long time. We asked our newsroom colleagues to help us bake, and so if the rule was if you bake for us, you can be a judge. We never really told them that we didn't really care about their opinion. And really, Leah and I, oh, that sounds really great. And then Leah and I were like, no, these are the ones that are going to win. And then we approached a pastry chef and a culinary instructor, and she, Amy Carter, fantastic woman, and she put together a team of bakers, and every year she's been doing that with her team, and really great because number one, the cookies are always perfect. So it's like, it's a very level playing field. When our colleagues baked, not always a level playing field, right? Yeah. We appreciated their efforts, however. But, so anyway, I remember the last year that I was involved in the contest in 2022, Amy worked on a recipe for like the entire time that we were making cookies. It was like, if it's too hard for Amy, we can't put that in the paper. Yeah, and it was like, the recipe was like this long anyway. It was like, there was no way it was gonna get in.
Yeah, there wouldn't have been room.
There wouldn't have been room, right, yeah.
And was it her trying to figure out what they were talking about, or trying to fix it so that it actually worked?
I think it was a little bit of both, like trying
Okay.
to fix it to get it to work, and then just the technical aspects of the way it was rolled and sliced and put together, it was just very complicated. And I thought, my God, she's been baking for 40 years as a professional. If she can't do it, Joe Wilson in Maple Grove will never be able to make this cookie. Yeah.
Not this guy. And you were going to elaborate too, Lee, I think?
I just was going to say that sometimes we had fabulous cookies that just weren't practical for a newspaper. And I'll tell the tale and hope the woman who sent it in isn't in the room. She sent it was a Swedish cookie that was a little bit like a Malamar bar or cookie, which was like a graham cracker that you had to make. And then it had like a puff of marshmallow cream, and then it had chocolate on top of it. And she had a charming story. It was, it was like 200 years old, and they brought it over on the Mayflower or wherever. I mean, it was this amazing story. So we wanted it to work.
And it was beautiful.
And it was really, beautiful. She sent us a picture of it. And then we tried to put it together, and again, took forever. But still, we thought of this as possibly a recipe for the strivers in the reading the newspaper. So we're sitting around the table, everyone picks up the cookie, because we all do this like at one time. Everyone picks it up, takes a bite, looks up, and they had chocolate marshmallow all over their face. And it was like, no, this is not for a cocktail party. Moving on.
What about if people are, and I think you talked a little bit about this, Nicole, for the Star Tribune, but if people in the audience are thinking about the cookie plate they're going to assemble for the holidays, you should have a little of this, a little of this, a little of this. Do you have any thoughts on what's a good way to assemble a cookie plate, whether you're making the cookies or, let's say, purchasing them?
Yeah, I would say we did. So we always worked with 5 cookies for the winners, winning plate when we were doing this, and we chose 5 for a very practical reason, because that's all that fit on the page. But what we would limit it to, we'd have 1 chocolate, 1, shaped cookie. Everything had to have a different shape, different texture, different sprinkles on top. So basically, it all looked different. And the other thing that we always encourage people to do was make sure that if you have a lot of cookies, make sure that the cookies are really small, because people want to taste every single one, and if it's as big as your head, you're not going to be able to do that. So.
And we also, as the contest went on year after year, we realized that people were baking all 5, and putting them on a tray. And so that's why we started selecting cookies within that year that would look really good together on a tray. But I would also suggest that, if you are making a cookie tray, to make cookies that are some that you can make in advance and freeze, or you can make a roll, like a refrigerator cookie, roll in advance, so you can very quickly do it the day of, or make, put a bar cookie in there because it will be really easy to make. Those kinds of time considerations as well will be really helpful.
Well, and cookies freeze pretty well too, right?
Right.
Not maybe all of them, but. What about ways over the years of doing the contest that you evolved? Like, I remember one that I'm a big fan of, and it made several times, I forget the name of it, that's like a Kit Kat bar kind of, that has those crackers in them, country club crackers in them. I really like that one.
Yeah.
But anyway, that I don't think would have flown at the beginning of the contest, but maybe by that time.
So what he's mentioning right now is a cookie that didn't have to be baked. Basically, it was pulling together processed stuff.
On the stovetop, basically.
Yeah,
You
on the
make a
stovetop.
caramel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were skeptical at first that this should even be in the contest because we kind of think of cookies as baking, so if it's not baked, is it really a cookie? And should it be in this contest? And, but we thought, once again, it was one of those, actually, the person who told the story had a great story about it.
A really good story.
Yeah.
And she even said in the story, it was her mother-in-law's recipe, and she said, "This is the trashiest recipe." Because it used club crackers, those nasty crackers.
And it was like caramel from a jar, I think, and it
No, I
was just
think we
like
make the
everything we like.
Oh, I don't think, no, I don't
you?
think. And you use butterscotch chips, which to me is the devil. They're like appalling, right? Yeah.
But she caught us at trashy, and it was
Yeah.
like,
We're like,
okay, we got to try this cookie, and we did, and we loved it, and we brought it to the newsroom, and it
Everyone
went
loved it.
fast. Everybody thought this was great, but it did not win first place, right?
No, it was a
No.
finalist.
Yeah.
But the weird thing is, so we had this event, this cookie event at the paper in the atrium of the building where, they baked 500 or 1,000 of each cookie, and the public could come and try all the cookies. And then they had like a People's Choice Award where you could, go and vote on your favorite one. And of course that won.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the winner that year,
So-
but yeah.
I think I'm having trouble seeing, but I think I'm supposed to be opening up the to the audience for questions now, right?
Ahead.
I'm sorry, there's lights are in my eyes, so I could barely see you, but now I see you out there.
First, let's have
This
a
is
round of
Rob, by the way,
applause
I'm
for Lee and Rick and for Chris. Oh, great, we have a question right down in front here. If you do have a question, please raise your hand and I will come find you.
Rob's gonna be moving throughout.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. You mentioned about the ingredients, specifically the butter. What about eggs? Brown eggs, white eggs, farm fresh eggs? Where do y'all get your eggs?
I always buy eggs from a place called Locally Laid. I buy them at the co-op, and they have eggs that are chickens rather that are free range, eating on a pasture. They're brown eggs, and they're full of protein, and they're fantastic. I mean, I always feel like if you're going to make a cookie and you're really going to, especially if you're going to haul something over to somebody else's house, like this is like my gift to you, you should use the best possible ingredients that your budget will allow. So, the best butter, the best eggs, the best chocolate, the freshest spices, those kinds of things, because it really will make a difference in the quality in the final product.
Do you refrigerate your eggs?
Yes. I don't live in France. I live here. I live in the United States.
I don't get
refrigerate
it
my
either,
eggs.
but I know people are talking about it. Do you have a egg comment as well, Lee?
I would just say, when I'm baking for my grandchildren, I buy the cheapest eggs that there are. They seem to like it. But I do a little better for others if I'm bringing it, so, yeah.
Our next question is the back of the auditorium to your right.
Do any of the recipes include THC?
Not in this version, no.
And the next question is in the back in the middle here.
You talked about freezing the cookies. What about freezing the dough so then you can bake them fresh when you need them?
I often do that. I have about 6 logs of dough in the freezer right now. And a little trick that I learned, so just a basic refrigerator cookie, you make it into a log, and it's a slice and bake. A little trick that someone told me, I don't know, is the paper towel trick. So you want to retain the round shape of a cookie. You make that log, and you slice the cardboard tube, and then you place the dough inside of that so it holds the shape, and maybe hold it with like a rubber binder or two just to hold it in place, and that will keep it, that round shape, right? Because I always put it in the refrigerator, the freezer, and you always end up with like one flat side. It's like, well, this looks stupid, and then you try to fix it when it's like never works, and so this is a thing that I've discovered recently, and it's very effective.
We're in the center of the auditorium here.
Hi, it's really not a question. I just want you to know that this contest has changed our family's holiday traditions. And I have been making your cookies for probably 10, 12 years now, I don't know. And the ultimate cookie, I hope the person who created this is here because I want to meet them. The ultimate cookie is the pistachio orange. And that it is the #1 cookie in our entire family. And we thank you for having this contest. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just say that it also became our holiday tradition too?
Yes, very
Like,
much.
in a really great way, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're down in front here.
I do a lot of baking with my kiddo at home. So from this book, what would be some recommendations of good cookies to bake with young children?
You know, there's some sort of candy-related ones with like crushed peppermints on them.
Oh, the chocolate peppermint, yeah.
There's a chocolate peppermint. There's also a I think it's called candy cane peppermint. They're in the front of the book. Drop cookies. Those are really popular with the kids. Actually, the one there's a hot cocoa one that we suggest you use really good chocolate, but if you're doing it with the kids, you know, again, I downgrade a bit. But you put little marshmallows on them like you would with a cup of hot chocolate, and that's also a favorite. And I think really that any of the shortbreads in particular, because those are, you know, you're not using anything that they can get hurt on, that you're mixing it up in a bowl, and you can just, you know, put it on a sheet pan and have them make shapes or make cutouts out of it, and that's kind of fun too. And there's actually some cutout cookies as well that are a little bit different. There's a lime cooler one that's really fabulous, and some gingerbread cookies that are really fabulous, all of which work really good with kids.
Is the Kit Kat one allergy-free?
So what kind of allergies? So for peanut allergy, I don't think we have many cookies with peanuts in that at all.
I don't think so. I don't know that it had peanut butter in it. You could garnish it with chopped peanuts, but I don't think that was necessary.
okay.
It's a really delicious cookie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for this contest and making our seasons bright. Is there a way to if you make a cookie and it is too sweet, to reduce the sugar and still have success with the cookie? Do you need to add more moisture or?
Judging from what the pastry chefs told us when they were saying some of the cookies were too sweet, I think the best thing to do is just to experiment a little bit, taking away a little of the sugar. I'm not sure. I think with the
Yeah, you would have to compensate a little bit for it, but you know, a lot of recipes. I don't know if you cook or bake out of the New York Times recipe archives. I love it when they have the recipe and then you start reading the comments and it's like, I love this, but, and then they make like 17 changes to them. I'm like, okay. That's what I would do if you want things a little less sweeter. And it was so interesting when we had the pastry chefs come and do that. I thought, well, of course they all think everything is too sweet. Everything in restaurants really isn't very sweet. Like, you know, like the goal of a lot of restaurant desserts is to kind of make it barely sweet, you know. So to their palates, of course, any kind of home baked goodie was very, very sweet.
I would also say too, for those of us who don't like that much sweetness, is that if the main flavor you're getting is just this sense of sweet, as opposed to the cranberries or the nuts or whatever other ingredients that are in there, I think that it's a missed opportunity. So go not sweet.
We're still in the front to your right.
Hi, thank you for all your good recipes. We've been enjoying them as a family. But I do have a question. I have not yet looked at your new book, and I was wondering how it differs from your previous book on Star Tribune winners. Thank you.
There are 25 new recipes that were winners from the contest. There's a total of 35 new recipes, 50 new pictures, and
3 or 4 essays and things like that.
yep.
You know, when the first book came out in 2018, it was the first 15 years of the contest, and Lee and I were at a thing maybe a week after it came out. We were giving a talk or signing, and someone came up, and the first question she said was, "Will there be an update?" I'm like, "It's been out a week. Can you give us a?" But I understood because, you know, it's like we were doing this annual contest, and so when we got to 20 years, we thought, and we kind of thought, well, our involvement with the contest is over now, and this was 20 years, nice round number, let's make a new book.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, 35 new recipes.
Yeah.
And I would also say that with this particular book, this is one that we wanted to make more personal. So we have personal stories of our growing up with making cookies and family favorites that we have. And so we figured people wanted to know maybe a little more about us, so.
Oh, hi. So this is off topic a little bit. Do
How dare you.
taste your cookie dough? Do you eat just cookie dough?
No, I don't.
Of course I do.
I was just asked to make some cookies. I make lactation cookies for young nursing moms. And someone who has 4 kids, and she asked me to do this, and I said, "What? You're not having another kid, are you?" And she said no. But she didn't want me to bake them, and I didn't realize that for the last 3 kids, I've been bringing her the cookie dough so that she could bake it as she wanted to, and she'd just been eating the raw cookie dough all that time. And I thought everyone knew that you weren't supposed to eat.
I know that.
Does everyone know what lactation cookies are?
Nah. Healthy.
Oh, okay.
It's healthy, yeah.
We do have time for one more question, but before we do, just a reminder that the fun doesn't end here. We do have a book signing after the program, and it's happening just outside the auditorium at the end of the bridge. The Star Tribune is here selling copies of the Ultimate Minnesota Cookie Book. It's only been out for a week, so now is the perfect time to get it before there's a rush and everyone snaps them. So please make sure you get your copies of the book tonight. And for those in the in-person crowd, thank you for your patience with the escalators. The escalator is still down, so as you exit, you'll want to cross the bridge and use the elevators on the other side. And with that, we are on to our final question.
So I have a question about baking. Do you prefer convection or non-convection when you're baking your cookies?
I like convection. That's an oven I've had for 20 years, and it seems to make it go faster. And evenly browned. But you can bake, I figure you can bake in anything that you have available. I happen to have that available, so.
Yeah, it's, when we started the contest, the first year that we did it, I baked all of the cookies, the semifinalist cookies, in the most horrific in conditions, in a kitchen that, you know, tiny with a terrible oven. When we replaced that oven and got a convection oven, it was like a completely different world. It was so great, you know. Everything bakes evenly. You don't have to turn the halfway through, you know, it's moving air through, so the flow is great. I highly recommend convection. Yeah.
So, yeah. Thanks very much, Lee and Rick, for entertaining all of our questions and for the beautiful book. And everybody, meet them out in the lobby for.
Thank you.
Don't
Thanks,
let
Chris.
what happened to almond flour happen to this book.